Hey, how's that for good, folks? Before we get into that, let me tell you this story is different. We're talking about Marcus Chen, 54, who lives in Montana's Bitterroot Mountains, where the nearest Starbucks is 80 miles away and no one cares about your Wi-Fi password. This guy has a cabin so remote that Google Maps just shrugs and gives up. I can't say this is entirely true, but what's the message? Where in America, the beautiful, are you watching this video from? Comment down exactly where you're watching it, so we can get started on our exciting journey to Bigfoot. Life had other plans, though. David didn't make it to retirement, and now Marcus was living their dream solo, which some days felt less like a dream and more like an extremely detailed memory that wouldn't fade. Dude was out here living like it's 1823, and honestly, respect. Up every morning before the sun even thought about rising, coffee brewed on a wood stove that he'd learned to operate through trial and a lot of error, chopping wood until his shoulders burned, tending a small greenhouse he'd built to grow vegetables year-round, reading by lantern light because the solar panels could only do so much in winter. Former biology professor turned mountain hermit, living his best isolated life in the middle of damn nowhere. Marcus had always been a scientist, facts over feelings, evidence over emotion. That's what made him good at what he did. Spent 30 years teaching kids about the natural world, about ecosystems and evolution, about how everything in nature made sense if you just looked at it the right way. No room for fairy tales in biology. You know that vibe when someone's whole worldview is built on observable reality? Yeah, that was Marcus. The cabin itself was solid. David had insisted on that. One big main room with a loft for sleeping, wood stove in the corner that kept things toasty when fed right, walls lined with books Marcus still hadn't finished reading, pictures of him and David everywhere their wedding day, hiking trips through Glacier National Park, David laughing at some joke Marcus had told, head thrown back like laughter was the only thing that mattered. Marcus kept those photos up not because he was stuck in the past, but because they reminded him what loving someone looked like when it was real and right and refused to give a damn what anyone thought. No kids, no close family left, just him and the wilderness and the weight of memories that got a little lighter each year. He'd made peace with it, mostly. Found purpose in the routine, keeping the fire going, maintaining the property, surviving winter after winter. Some days that was enough. Some days it had to be. The locals down in Darby, nearest town, population maybe 700, on a good day they had stories about these mountains. Always talking about shit that didn't make sense. Shadows moving wrong between the trees. Howls at night that didn't match any animal in any biology textbook Marcus had ever read. Footprints by the creek that were too big, too wide, shaped all wrong. Hunters would come back with stories about feeling watched, about finding tree structures that didn't occur naturally, about deer carcasses arranged in patterns that made their skin crawl. Marcus heard it all when he'd drive down monthly for supplies. He'd smile politely, nod, pay for his groceries, and think they were all watching too much cable TV. 4 years in these mountains, and he'd never seen anything he couldn't explain with basic science. Sure, sometimes branches would snap in the dark, or he'd get that feeling like eyes were on him from the tree line. But that was just psychology. Humans are pattern recognition machines, always seeing threats that aren't there. Evolution made us paranoid because paranoid ancestors survived long enough to reproduce. Man was out here talking to himself, and birds and shit, keeping his mind sharp by cataloging plant species, taking notes on animal behavior, basically treating the wilderness like one long field study. He'd filled notebooks with observations, migration patterns, predator-prey relationships, seasonal changes in vegetation. Old habits die hard, and teaching might have been behind him, but the scientist part? That was bone deep. His daily routine was tight. Up at 5:30 a.m., coffee and oatmeal, check the greenhouse, chop wood for an hour, read until lunch, afternoon hike to keep his body from seizing up, dinner, more reading, bed by 9 p.m., rinse and repeat. The kind of schedule that would drive most people insane but gave Marcus structure in a life that had lost its anchor when David died. The thing about grief is it changes shape over time. First, it's this crushing weight that makes you question whether you want to wake up tomorrow. Then it becomes this companion you carry everywhere, quiet but constant, coloring everything you see and do. Marcus had made his peace with it. Mostly, he'd stopped crying every time he saw David's jacket hanging by the door. Started being able to remember the good times without the memory punching him in the chest. Found a way to keep living that honored what they'd had without being destroyed by what he'd lost. But damn, some nights got lonely. Not the kind of lonely where you want people around. He'd had enough of faculty meetings and small talk to last a lifetime. Nah, this was deeper. The kind where you miss having someone to care for, someone who needs you. David used to say Marcus had too much love to keep bottled up, that he was meant to nurture and teach and help things grow. Out here in the middle of nowhere, with just ravens and pine martens for company, that part of him was collecting dust. 4 winters in these mountains, and Marcus thought he'd seen everything the Bitterroots could throw at him. Blizzards that lasted a week straight, power outages when the solar panels got buried. That one time a mountain lion tested his defenses and decided Marcus's cabin wasn't worth the effort after he started banging pots and screaming like a madman. He figured he'd settled into the rhythm of this place, learned its moods, understood its language. Man was wrong as hell. It started in late December, subtle enough that Marcus almost missed it. He was checking his trail cameras set up to monitor wildlife, old professor habits, and noticed something odd. Large tracks in the snow, way too big for any bear that should have been hibernating. 16, maybe 17 inches long, 5 clear toe impressions, but the proportions were all wrong. The stride was enormous, like whatever made them could step over his woodpile without breaking pace. Marcus's scientist brain kicked in immediately. He measured the tracks, photographed them from multiple angles, compared them to his reference books. Didn't match anything. Not bear, not elk, definitely not human. He documented everything in his notebook with the same precision he'd used. Grading lab reports, track dimensions, gait pattern, depth of impression, suggesting significant weight. Weird, but not impossible. Nature was full of anomalies. Could be some genetic abnormality. A bear with unusual foot structure. Something explainable if he just had enough data. Then more signs showed up. Trees with branches broken clean off. At 9, 10, 11 feet high snapped. Not sawed or chewed, just broken like someone had reached up and yanked them down. Fresh breaks too, sap still oozing in the cold. Marcus examined them carefully, tried to logic it out. Maybe a bull elk during rut, antlers catching branches. But elk didn't reach that high, and the break patterns were wrong. Rocks started appearing on his trail, stacked in careful cairns that Marcus sure as hell hadn't built. 3 stones balanced perfectly, placed at intervals like markers or messages. He documented those too, photographed them, tried to find a natural explanation. Wind? No. Animals? Unlikely. Other hikers. Nobody came up here in winter. The sounds started in early January. Low calls rolling through the valley at night, part howl, part groan, hitting frequencies that made Marcus's chest vibrate and his hindbrain scream danger. He recorded them on his phone, played them back, tried to match them to known species. Wolves? Wrong pitch. Elk? Wrong structure. Mountain lion? Not even close. For the first time in 4 years, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt since his first week alone in the cabin. Uncertainty. The scientist in him demanded rational explanations, but the data wasn't cooperating. He started keeping detailed logs, treating this like a research project, because that's what he did: turn confusion into inquiry, mystery into methodology. January 10th, tracks circling the cabin, multiple sizes. January 14th, trees near the greenhouse with bark stripped at heights, suggesting bipedal locomotion. January 17th, woodpile rearranged overnight, logs stacked in a pattern Marcus definitely hadn't created. January 20th, something heavy walking on his roof at 3 a.m., footsteps slow and deliberate, making the whole structure creak. Marcus started sleeping lighter, keeping a flashlight by the bed, checking the windows more often than he'd admit. Not scared exactly, fear without action was wasted energy, but alert, aware. Every field biologist knew that feeling of being watched by something higher up the food chain. He'd felt it once tracking grizzlies in Yellowstone, that prickle on the back of your neck that says predator nearby. Except this felt different. Not aggressive, not immediately threatening, more like curiosity, observation. Like whatever was out there was studying him the same way he was trying to study it. The rational part of Marcus's brain kept offering explanations. Rare animal behavior, undocumented species, psychological projection. 4 years of isolation, maybe catching up with him, making him see patterns that weren't there. But the scientist in him couldn't ignore the data. Something was happening that didn't fit established models. He started leaving his trail cameras running 24/7, checking them obsessively. Mostly caught normal stuff. Deer, foxes, ravens, the occasional moose. But sometimes, in the background of footage, there'd be something. Shadows that moved wrong. A shape between trees that was too tall, too broad. Movement that started in one frame and ended 3 frames later with no logical path between them. Nothing definitive. Nothing he could publish or even show someone without looking crazy. Just enough to make him question everything he thought he knew about these mountains. Mid-January hit hard. Temperature dropped to where spit would freeze before it hit the ground. Wind howling through the valley like something alive and pissed off. Marcus spent most of his time inside, keeping the fire going, rationing his supplies, reading the same books he'd read 5 times already. The isolation pressed in heavier during storms, made the cabin feel smaller, made his thoughts louder. He thought about David a lot during those long nights, about how David would have loved this mystery, would have been fascinated by the unknown. David had always been the dreamer between them, the one who saw poetry where Marcus saw data, who found meaning in questions that had no answers. Not everything needs to be understood, David used to say. Sometimes, wonder is enough. Marcus had never been good at wonder. He needed answers, needed things to make sense, needed the world to follow rules he could learn and teach. But out here, with something impossible leaving tracks in the snow and rearranging his firewood, he was starting to understand what David meant. Some things existed in the space between knowing and not knowing, and maybe that was okay. January 23rd changed everything. Marcus had just finished dinner venison stew from a deer he'd harvested in fall, recipe David had perfected over years of trial and error. He was washing dishes, mind on nothing in particular, when he heard it, a sound that made him freeze mid-scrub, water dripping from his hands, every instinct suddenly screaming. Crying, deep, guttural, mournful crying, coming from somewhere outside, not human definitely, not human but not animal either. Something in between, something that understood loss and pain and desperation in a way that transcended species. Marcus dried his hands slowly, moved to the window. The sun had set an hour ago, and the forest was that particular kind of dark you only get in mountains in winter, absolute, consuming, the kind of dark that makes you remember humans used to be prey. He couldn't see anything at first, just trees and snow and shadows. Then something moved. His brain tried to categorize it, tried to make it make sense. A person in winter gear, a bear on its hind legs, some trick of the light, and his tired eyes. But as it stepped into the clearing near his cabin, all those rationalizations crumbled. The figure stood maybe 8.5 feet tall, covered in thick russet brown hair that looked coarse and wild. Massive shoulders, long arms, moving with a grace that didn't match its size. The face was visible in the moonlight, more human than ape, with a flat nose, pronounced brow ridge, and eyes that caught the light and reflected it back with an intelligence Marcus recognized instantly. This was a thinking creature, a feeling creature. And in those massive arms, held careful and close against a chest that heaved with sobs, was something smaller, a baby, limp and motionless. Marcus stood frozen at his window, 30 years of biology education warring with what his eyes were telling him. This wasn't possible. Gigantopithecus had been extinct for 100,000 years. Bipedal apes of this size didn't exist in North America. Every credible scientist agreed Bigfoot was folklore, misidentification, wishful thinking. And yet, the creature took another step forward, and Marcus could see her face more clearly now because yes, this was definitely a her. Maternal instinct written in every line of her body. Tears tracked through the fur on her face, freezing in the cold. She was looking directly at his cabin, directly at his window, directly at him. Their eyes met across the distance, and Marcus felt something fundamental shift in his understanding of the world. This wasn't a dumb animal. This was a person, a mother holding her dying baby and looking at the strange creature who lived in the wooden den for, what? Help? Hope? One last desperate attempt to save her child. Every cell in Marcus's body was screaming. His lizard brain wanted to hide, to lock the doors, to pretend this wasn't happening. But 30 years of teaching biology meant 30 years of caring about life in all its forms. And right now, life was dying in the arms of a mother who'd run out of options. The scientist in him, and the human in him, had a conversation that lasted maybe 2 seconds and felt like forever. Then Marcus moved, grabbed his coat, his medical kit, because he kept one stocked, living out here alone, and stepped out onto his porch. The cold hit him like a physical force, but he barely noticed. He was focused on the mother, who'd gone completely still when the door opened. Her body tensed, ready to run, but she didn't. She stayed frozen, her baby clutched tight, everything about her screaming desperation. "Hey," Marcus said softly, hands visible and empty. "Hey, it's okay. I see you. I see him." The mother made a sound low, questioning, heartbreaking. Marcus took a slow step forward. "I'm a scientist. Was. I taught biology, studied life, all kinds of life. And I can try to help. If you'll let me." Probably she didn't understand his words, but she understood his tone, his body language, the way he moved slow and careful, like you would around any scared, hurt creature. She watched him with those 2 intelligent eyes, weighing options, making decisions. Then she did something that made Marcus's throat close up. She walked forward, each step deliberate and slow, crossed the distance between them, and knelt in the snow at the base of his porch steps. With movements so gentle they seemed impossible from hands that large, she laid her baby down on the wooden planks. The baby was small, maybe 3.5 feet long, covered in softer fur than its mother, dark brown like wet earth. Its chest barely moved. Even from where Marcus stood, he could smell it. Blood, infection, something desperately wrong. The mother backed away 3 steps, knelt in the snow, lowered her head, and made a sound that Marcus would hear in his dreams for the rest of his life. A plea, a prayer, a mother begging a stranger to save her child because she'd run out of ways to save him herself. Marcus looked at the baby, looked at the mother, felt every impossible thing he'd ever believed crack wide open. Then he knelt down beside the small body and did what he'd been trained to do: assess, help, save. The baby was burning up, fever radiating through the fur. Marcus carefully checked for breathing shallow and rapid, not good. Pulse fast and thready. He gently moved the fur on the torso and found it immediately. A wound across the left side, maybe 7 inches long, edges inflamed and weeping pus. The surrounding area was swollen, hot, angry red, visible even under all that hair. Barbed wire. Marcus recognized the injury pattern immediately. This baby had gotten caught in some kind of trap, torn itself free, and now infection was winning the war. "Okay," Marcus said, more to himself than anyone. "Okay, we can work with this." He looked up at the mother, who hadn't moved, was barely breathing. "I need to take him inside, keep him warm, clean this wound. You understand?" The mother's eyes held his. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then she made that humming sound again and dipped her head once. Yes, please, save him. Marcus wrapped the baby carefully in his coat. Damn the cold, this baby needed warmth more than he did. Lifted him, surprised by the weight, maybe 50 pounds of solid muscle under all that fur. The baby whimpered once. A sound so small and hurt it made Marcus's chest ache, but didn't wake up. I got him, Mama, Marcus said, looking back at the mother. I promise you, I'll do everything I can. The mother stood slowly, and even kneeling she was taller than Marcus. She pressed both massive hands to her chest, then extended them toward him. An offering, a gift, her heart, her trust, her only child. Marcus carried the baby inside, feeling the mother's eyes on his back the whole way. Set him down on the couch near the wood stove, started grabbing supplies. This was way beyond first aid, but he'd done field research in remote areas, knew how to work with what you had. And what he had was 30 years of biology knowledge, basic medical training, and a desperation to not let this baby die. He glanced out the window. The mother had moved to the edge of the tree line, barely visible in the darkness. She'd sat down in the snow, arms wrapped around herself, rocking slightly, waiting, watching. A mother in agony, trusting her baby to a creature she should fear. Don't worry, Mama, Marcus whispered. I got him. We're going to fight like hell. And for the first time in 4 years, Marcus felt something he'd forgotten existed. Purpose. Need. Someone depending on him for survival. He rolled up his sleeves and got to work, doing what he'd spent his whole life doing. Understanding life, protecting life, fighting for life to continue. The baby's breathing was rapid and shallow tachypnea. Marcus's brain supplied automatically, 30 years of teaching kicking in even now. Respiratory rate, probably twice what it should be, compensating for systemic infection. He worked methodically, the way he'd trained graduate students to approach field injuries. Except, this was no research project. This was a dying child who shouldn't exist but was real anyway. First priority, assess the full extent of damage. Marcus carefully trimmed away matted fur around the wound with scissors, talking softly the whole time, even though the baby was barely conscious. Old habit from volunteering at the Wildlife Rehab Center back in Missoula. Easy, little guy. I know this sucks. We're going to get you sorted out. His hands were steady despite everything decades of dissection work, of handling delicate specimens, paying off in the worst possible way. With the area cleared, the wound revealed itself fully, worse than he'd thought. The barbed wire, because that's absolutely what this was, had cut deep into muscle tissue, maybe nicked something internal. The edges were ragged, badly infected, probably 4 or 5 days old based on the tissue degradation. In a human, this would mean IV antibiotics, possible surgical debridement, hospital stay. Out here, with a creature that wasn't supposed to exist, he'd have to get creative. Marcus boiled water on the stove, sterilized his supplies as best he could. His medical kit had basics, antiseptic, gauze, surgical tape, a bottle of amoxicillin he'd kept from his last bout of bronchitis. He'd also spent years studying ethnobotany, had collected local medicinal plants, yarrow for hemostasis, wild oregano for its antimicrobial properties, devil's club root. The indigenous peoples around here had used it for infections for centuries. The baby stirred when Marcus started cleaning the wound, made a sound between a whimper and a growl that was way too human. His eyes opened briefly dark brown, almost black, but with flecks of amber that caught the lantern light. He looked directly at Marcus with an expression that carried awareness, fear, pain, understanding. Then his eyes rolled back and he went limp again. Stay with me, buddy. Stay with me. Marcus flushed the wound with antiseptic diluted water, working as gently as he could but thorough as hell. Removed debris, bits of bark, dirt, rust from the wire that made his stomach turn. The baby's body jerked, but he didn't regain consciousness. Fever had him deep under, which was probably merciful given what Marcus had to do next. He packed the wound with a poultice he made from crushed devil's club root, mixed with wild oregano and yarrow, bound with honey as both antimicrobial and adhesive. Traditional medicine meeting whatever knowledge he could apply from veterinary science. He'd give the baby antibiotics too, but dosage was pure guesswork. Probably weighed less than an adult human, but metabolism might be different. He settled on a pediatric dose and prayed he was in the right ballpark, wrapped the wound in clean gauze, secured it with surgical tape and strips of cloth torn from an old shirt. The baby's breathing was still labored, but maybe marginally less frantic. Marcus covered him with every blanket he owned, kept the fire burning hot. Fever needed to break, but shock from hypothermia was just as dangerous. Balance. Everything was balance. Outside, through the window, the mother still sat in the snow, hadn't moved an inch, just watching the cabin like her entire existence depended on what was happening inside. Marcus grabbed a thermos of warm water and some dried venison, stepped out onto the porch. The cold slapped him hard after the warmth inside. The mother's head snapped up, body tensing, but she didn't stand. "He's alive," Marcus called out softly. "Fever's high, infection's bad, but he's fighting." The mother made a sound low, questioning, breaking at the edges. Marcus set the water and food on the porch railing. I don't know if you eat meat, or if you can even digest what I eat, but you should take something. You've been out here for who knows how long, and you're no good to him if you collapse." The mother stood slowly, and damn, standing she was impressive, had to be 8.5, maybe 9 feet tall, built like she could tear through trees without trying. She took a few steps closer, stopped at the base of the porch steps. In the moonlight filtering through clouds, Marcus could see her more clearly. The face was broad, more ape-like than human, but with features that held expression: worry, fear, exhaustion, hope. She reached down, grabbed a handful of snow, and placed it carefully on the bottom step. Then she touched her chest, touched the snow, pointed at the cabin. Marcus had to think for a second, then understood. She was asking if he needed anything, if she could help. "Just stay close," Marcus said, throat tight. "He might need you. Might need to know you're here." The mother made that humming sound again, deeper this time. Then she did something that made Marcus question everything he thought he knew about intelligence and communication. She nodded. Actually nodded. A gesture of understanding that crossed every supposed boundary between their species. Marcus stood there on his porch, exhausted and freezing, watching a creature that science said didn't exist, acknowledge his words with body language he recognized in his bones. 30 years teaching evolution, explaining how humans shared common ancestors with apes. And none of it had prepared him for this, for intelligence, looking back at him from a face that wasn't human, but wasn't exactly not human either. The mother retreated to her spot at the tree line, settled back into her vigil. Marcus went inside, heart hammering, mind racing through everything he thought he knew about primates, about hominids, about what was possible in the natural world. The baby hadn't moved. Marcus settled into the chair beside the couch, monitoring breathing, checking pulse every few minutes, replacing the compress on his forehead with cool water. Talked to him in English and broken Spanish. David had been fluent, had tried to teach Marcus for years, saying whatever came to mind. "Your mama's out there waiting for you, kid. Been out there in the cold this whole time because she loves you that much. That's something, you know? That kind of love. Universal. Crosses every damn line we draw." He paused, voice cracking. "You gotta fight. Show her you're strong. Show her all this was worth it." Around 2 a.m., the baby started seizing. Full tonic-clonic, body rigid, limbs jerking, jaw clenched so tight Marcus was terrified he'd crack teeth. Febrile seizure fever too high, brain misfiring. Marcus had seen it in field work, in documentaries, but never had to manage it alone with a creature he couldn't even identify scientifically. He grabbed more cold water, worked frantically to bring the temperature down, held the thrashing body so the baby wouldn't hurt himself on the couch frame, fought the panic rising in his chest because he'd seen seizures that didn't stop, had read about status epilepticus and brain damage and death. Come on, please." The seizure lasted 75 seconds that felt like 75 hours. When it finally stopped, the baby went completely limp. For one terrible moment, Marcus couldn't find a pulse. Then he felt it faint, thready, but there. He looked out the window. The mother was standing now, pressed against a tree, her body language screaming distress. She'd heard. She knew. Marcus met her eyes through the glass and shook his head slowly. Not gone, but close. Too close. The sound the mother made, low, broken, hopeless, was the worst thing Marcus had ever heard. Worse than the call telling him David had collapsed. Worse than anything human grief had ever produced. It was the sound of a mother facing the unthinkable, the unbearable, the thing no parent should ever have to watch. "Fuck this," Marcus muttered. He grabbed his coat, went to the door, opened it. "Mama, you hear me?" The mother looked up, her massive form trembling. "He's still alive. You understand. Still breathing, still fighting. But I need you to believe that. Need you to hold on to that. Because..." Marcus's voice broke. "Because kids know. They feel what their parents feel. And if you give up out there, he's gonna feel that in here. So you stay strong. And I'll stay strong. And we're gonna drag this kid through tonight together. Deal?" The mother stared at him for a long moment. Then she straightened up, wiped her face with one huge hand, and nodded once. Firm, determined. "That's right. We're his mothers right now, both of us. And we don't quit." Marcus went back inside, back to the baby's side. Refreshed the poultice, adjusted the blankets, dripped more water into his mouth whenever he'd swallow, sang songs David used to sing old folk tunes, off-key and half-forgotten, but better than silence. And he prayed to whatever forces might be listening, evolution, entropy, the universe itself, asking for this one impossible thing to survive, one impossible night. Dawn came slow and grey, light creeping reluctant through heavy clouds. Marcus hadn't slept, running on coffee and adrenaline, and sheer stubborn refusal to let this baby die on his watch. The fever hadn't broken, but it had plateaued. The baby's breathing was still shallow, but marginally more stable. Progress. Maybe. Possibly. Marcus stepped outside as the sun rose, exhausted down to his DNA. The mother was still there, covered in fresh snow, frosted like a statue. When she saw him, she stood so fast, she stumbled, made a sound that was pure desperate question. Marcus managed a tired smile. He made it through the night. The mother's whole body sagged with relief. She made a series of soft sounds, not quite words, but definitely communication, gratitude and hope and questions. Marcus couldn't fully parse, but understood anyway. "He's not out of the woods yet," Marcus said, then laughed at his own pun. "But he's fighting. Your boy's a fighter." The mother approached the cabin slowly, stopped at the porch steps, knelt down. She placed something on the bottom step, a bundle of roots, bark, and moss, carefully arranged like an offering. Marcus picked it up, examined it with his biologist's eye, recognized some devil's club, cedar bark, both with known medicinal properties. Others he didn't know but suspected were antimicrobial. She'd brought medicine, her medicine. Knowledge passed down through generations of her people. "Thank you," Marcus said, emotion thick in his voice. "I'll use these, I promise." The mother touched her chest, then reached out slowly, palm up. Marcus understood the gesture: trust, connection, something deeper than words. Without thinking about how insane this was, he stepped forward and placed his hand in hers. Her hand was massive, rough with calluses, warm despite the cold. She closed her fingers gently around his hand, could have crushed every bone without effort, but held him like something precious and fragile. Her eyes were wet, but different now. Not despair. Gratitude. Recognition. Connection. They stayed like that for a long moment, human and Bigfoot, hands clasped, everything Marcus thought he knew about the world, rearranging itself in real time. Then she let go, stepped back, and melted into the forest like smoke. Marcus stood there holding the bundle of roots, hand still tingling, wondering if he'd just participated in the most significant moment of interspecies, the communication, in human history, or if isolation had finally broken his brain completely. The baby's soft sound from inside answered that question. This was real, all of it. Marcus went back to work. Used some of the roots the mother brought, grinding them into paste with a mortar and pestle he'd brought for plant specimens. Mixed them with his own remedies, combining indigenous knowledge with Western medicine, bridging traditions that had never been meant to meet. The poultice he created was thick, dark, smelled like the forest floor after rain. Applied it carefully to the wound, which looked marginally better, less angry, edges maybe starting to knit. Gave the baby another dose of antibiotics. Kept him warm, kept him hydrated, kept vigil like he was conducting the most important experiment of his life. Because he was. This wasn't just about saving one baby. It was about everything, about whether compassion could cross the most impossible boundaries, about whether science and wonder could coexist, about whether a middle-aged biology professor who thought he'd lost his purpose could still matter in the world. Day 2 was a blur. The baby woke up a few times, eyes clearer but still confused and scared. Each time, Marcus talked to him softly, let him know he was safe, gave him water with honey dissolved in it. The baby would look at him with those two aware eyes, then drift back into fevered sleep. The mother came to the edge of the clearing 3 times that day. Each time, Marcus would step out and give her an update. They developed a system. Marcus would hold up fingers for the baby's temperature, point to his own chest, and breathe slow or fast to indicate respiratory rate. The mother would respond with sounds Marcus was learning to interpret. Low hum meant acknowledgement. Higher pitch meant concern. That rumbling growl meant gratitude so deep it didn't have words. By the 3rd day, something shifted. The baby woke up and stayed awake for almost an hour. His eyes tracked Marcus as he moved around the cabin, awareness sharpening. When Marcus brought him water, he drank without help, even lifted his head on his own. Small victories that felt monumental. "Hey there, tough guy," Marcus said, settling beside him. "Welcome back to the land of the living." The baby made a soft grunt, tried to sit up, winced from the pain, settled back down. But he was looking at Marcus now with focus, not fever confusion. "Your mama's outside," Marcus told him. "She's been there every single day, waiting for you. Never left. You know that. That's love, kid, real as anything in the world." The baby's eyes went to the window. He made a sound, not quite a word, but clearly a call. Outside, Marcus heard an answering call, joyful and breaking at once. "Yeah, she hears you. She knows you're okay." Marcus changed the bandage. The wound looked better, significantly better. Inflammation decreasing, no new pus, edges definitely starting to close. The combination of medicines was working, or maybe just the baby's own immune system finally getting ahead of the infection. He reapplied the poultice, gave another dose of antibiotics. The baby watched everything Marcus did with intense curiosity, this scientist in miniature studying the weird creature that had saved him. "You're going to have one hell of a scar," Marcus told him. "But scars are just proof you survived something that tried to kill you. Wear it proud." The baby tilted his head, trying to parse meaning from tone, if not words. Then he did something that made Marcus's heart flip. He reached out one small hand and touched Marcus's arm. Gently, deliberately. A gesture of connection, of thanks, of something that transcended the impossibility of this entire situation. "Oh, buddy," Marcus whispered, covering the small hand with his own. "You're so welcome. You're so welcome." That night, the mother came closer than ever before, stood just at the porch steps, looking through the window at her baby sleeping peacefully. Marcus opened the door slowly, kept his movements calm. "You want to come in? See him up close?" The mother hesitated, looked at the cabin, at Marcus, at the doorway that was definitely too small for her. Then she shook her head slowly, made a soft sound. Marcus nodded. "I get it. This is my space, and you're respecting that. But he's doing good, Mama, really good. Another few days and he'll be ready to go home." The mother reached into a pouch Marcus hadn't noticed before, woven from plant fibers, hanging at her side, and pulled out something small, held it out. It was a carving, maybe 3 inches tall, made from wood and shaped into something that looked like a bird mid-flight. The detail was incredible, every feather visible, the curve of wings catching motion. Art. She'd made art. For me? Marcus asked, taking it carefully. The mother nodded, made a sound, pointed at Marcus, pointed at the carving. Gift. Friendship. Thanks. Connection deeper than either of them could fully express. This is beautiful, Marcus said, emotion choking his voice. Thank you. I'll treasure this forever. The mother touched her own chest, then pointed at Marcus's heart. Same species or not, we understand each other. Then she turned and disappeared into the darkness, leaving Marcus standing in the cold holding a carved bird that proved everything he'd believed about the world was incomplete. By day 5, the baby could sit up on his own. By day 6, he was trying to stand, wobbling on legs that were still weak, but getting stronger by the hour. Marcus fed him mashed berries mixed with honey, bits of dried venison, whatever he had that might work for a young, omnivorous primate. The baby ate like he was starving, which he probably was, and his eyes got brighter with each meal. He started following Marcus around the cabin, limping but determined. When Marcus chopped wood, he'd sit on the porch and watch. When Marcus cooked, he'd creep closer, fascinated by fire and the smell of food. He made sounds, chirps and grunts, and soft hoots that might have been baby babble or might have been actual language Marcus couldn't understand. Marcus talked to him constantly, carrying on one-sided conversations that made the cabin feel less empty than it had in years. You know what I think? I think you're going to grow up to be someone important in your family. Probably going to be a leader or something. The way you're always watching, always learning, trying to figure out how everything works. You've got that scientist brain going on. The baby carefully placed a piece of firewood on the stack, looked at Marcus for approval. Perfect. You're a natural. The mother still came every evening, and now the baby would see her through the window and make excited sounds, pressing his face against the glass. They'd call back and forth, mother and child, speaking in a language older than anything Marcus had ever studied, full of meaning he could feel even if he couldn't translate. Sometimes, Marcus would just watch them, tears streaming down his face, thinking about David and how much he would have loved this. How David would have seen the poetry in this moment, would have understood what Marcus was only beginning to grasp. That intelligence came in forms we weren't trained to recognize. That family was a force that transcended species. That love was the most universal language in existence. On day 7, reality came crashing back. Marcus woke to absolute silence. Not the normal forest silence, but something heavier, more ominous. The kind of quiet that meant every animal in the area had gone into hiding because predators were near. He looked out the window. His stomach dropped. There were men in his clearing, 6 of them this time, spread out in tactical formation, all wearing unmarked tactical gear. Not hunters, not Forest Service. These were contractors, professional, organized, moving with precision that meant serious training. And they all carried tranquilizer rifles, with scopes that probably cost more than Marcus's entire cabin. The baby was still asleep on the couch, recovering body needing rest. Marcus's mind raced. The men from before, they'd come back, just like he knew they would. And this time they'd brought an entire team. One of the men, tall, buzz-cut, leader type, pulled out what looked like a military-grade thermal scanner, pointed it at the cabin. Marcus saw his expression change. Target acquired. Shit. Marcus moved fast, grabbed the baby, wrapped him in blankets tight. The baby woke up, made a questioning sound, but Marcus shushed him gently. We gotta be quiet now, buddy. Real quiet. It's hide and seek time. He moved to the root cellar built by the previous owner, a paranoid survivalist who'd wanted an escape route. Small, cramped, dark, but hidden under a rug in the corner. Marcus had used it for food storage, never thinking he'd need it for anything else. climbed down the ladder with the baby clinging to his back, surprisingly strong for someone who'd been dying a week ago, settled him in the corner, covered him with every blanket he could grab from above. Stay here. No matter what you hear, stay quiet. Entiendes? The baby's eyes were huge, scared, but he nodded. Smart kid. He understood danger. Marcus climbed back up, closed the hatch, replaced the rug, tried to make everything look normal. Then he stepped outside before they could breach his home, because at least out here he could control the confrontation. Morning, he called out, voice steady despite his hammering heart. Bit early for visitors. The tall one approached, rifle lowered but ready. Dr. Chen, we've been monitoring this area. We have reason to believe you're harboring an endangered specimen. Specimen? Marcus felt anger rise, sharp and hot. You mean a living creature, an intelligent being? Because that's what we're talking about here, right? Not a specimen. A person. Sir, we don't have time for philosophical debates. We have thermal confirmation of a large primate in your residence. We need to retrieve it before... Before what? Marcus stepped forward, physicist's stance solid. Before you can cage it, study it, turn it into a goddamn science project. I'm a biologist. Spent 30 years teaching evolution, biodiversity, conservation. You know what I learned? That intelligence deserves respect, regardless of its form. Two of the men started moving toward the cabin. Marcus blocked the door. You're not going in my house. Dr. Chen, don't make this difficult. We have authorization. Authorization from who? Show me a warrant. Show me federal credentials. Show me anything that gives you legal right to be on my property, threatening me, and hunting endangered species. The tall one's expression hardened. This is above your clearance level. Now step aside. No. For a moment, everything hung in balance. 6 armed men against one middle-aged professor protecting a baby that shouldn't exist. Marcus knew how this ended if it came to force, but David's voice echoed in his head, something he'd said years ago during a faculty meeting about ethics. Sometimes the right thing and the smart thing aren't the same, and sometimes you just got to choose right. The tall one nodded to his team. 2 men grabbed Marcus's arms, pulled him away from the door. He fought, kicked, struggled, channeled every ounce of fury he'd been holding since David died, since the world took everything good and left him alone. Get the hell off me. You have no right. They zip-tied his hands, sat him on the porch steps with one guard. The others went inside. Marcus heard them moving through his cabin, opening cabinets, checking closets, pulling up floorboards. Don't find it. Please don't find the cellar. His heart pounded so hard, he thought it might crack ribs. The baby was right there, hidden under a rug, maybe 15 feet from where these men were searching. If they found him, "Sir, we've got nothing," one of the men called out. No sign of the target. The tall one's jaw tightened. Thermal showed clear signature. Check everywhere. Under the floor, in the walls, everywhere. They searched for 30 minutes, getting increasingly frustrated. Checked the loft, the shed outside, even the damn outhouse. But the root cellar had been built by someone who knew how to hide things. No obvious seams, insulated enough to dampen thermal signatures, designed to be invisible. They weren't finding it. Finally, the tall one stood in front of Marcus, radio in hand. Target, not at this location. Continuing search pattern, moving northeast. He crouched down, got in Marcus's face. Dr. Chen, that creature is valuable. Worth millions in the right markets. You're protecting it. We know you are. But we will find it. And when we do, you'll be charged with obstruction, theft of federal property, and about 15 other things I'll invent if I have to. Marcus met his eyes. You know what's valuable? The fact that something in these mountains has survived despite everything humanity's done to destroy it. The fact that intelligence exists in forms we never acknowledged. The fact that a mother loved her baby enough to trust the impossible. That's valuable. Not whatever dollar amount you've put on a living being's head. The man stared at him for a long moment, Then he stood up, cut Marcus's zip ties. "We'll be back. Count on it." They left without another word, trucks disappearing down the dirt road in a convoy of failed mission and wounded pride. Marcus waited until he couldn't hear engines anymore. Waited another 10 minutes to be absolutely sure. Then he went inside, locked every door, and opened the root cellar. The baby was curled in the corner, exactly where Marcus had left him, shaking, eyes huge with fear. When he saw Marcus, he made a soft crying sound and reached up. "I know, buddy. I know. But you did so good. So good." He pulled the baby out, held him close while he trembled. Outside, Marcus heard a sound the mother, calling from deep in the forest. She'd watched everything, been forced to hide while strangers invaded her baby's sanctuary, unable to help without revealing herself. Marcus carried the baby to the window. The mother was at the tree line, her body language screaming anguish and rage. "He's okay," Marcus called. "They're gone. He's safe." But even as he said it, Marcus knew the truth. This place wasn't safe anymore. The men knew something was here. They'd be back with better equipment, more resources, warrants real or fabricated. They wouldn't stop until they had what they came for. The baby couldn't stay. That night, Marcus made the hardest decision since David's funeral. He'd spent a week saving this baby, bonding with him, letting himself care about something again. And now he had to let him go before caring turned into getting him captured. He packed supplies with shaking hands, the rest of his antibiotics, the medicinal herbs, bandages, dried food, water purification tablets. Put them in a waterproof bag designed for backpacking. The baby watched him with those two aware eyes, and Marcus knew he understood something was changing. "You gotta go home, buddy," Marcus said, voice breaking. "Back to your family, deep in the mountains where those men can't find you. You understand?" The baby made a sad sound, pressed against Marcus's leg. "I know. I'm gonna miss you too, more than you could possibly know. But staying here, that's not safe anymore. And your mama, she needs you. She's been waiting so long." Marcus opened the door just before dawn. The mother was already there, like she'd been waiting for this moment, knowing it was coming. For a long time, the three of them just stood there in the pre-dawn darkness. Then Marcus knelt down, hugged the baby one last time. The baby clung to him, made sounds that might have been his version of crying, and Marcus let his own tears fall freely. "You be good for your mama, okay? Grow up strong, stay hidden, stay safe, and maybe remember the weird human who bandaged you up and talked too much." He stood up, gently guided the baby toward the porch edge. The mother stepped forward slowly, knelt down at the base of the steps. The baby looked between them, his mother and his savior torn between two worlds. Then he made his choice. He moved to his mother, and she scooped him up with movements so gentle they defied her size, held him close, rocking him like parents have rocked children since the beginning of time. She made sounds deep, complex, full of joy and relief and love so vast it made the mountains seem small. Marcus handed her the bag of supplies. For his wound, keep it clean, keep changing the bandages. The antibiotics, 1 pill every day until they're gone. And the salve, that's for... The mother reached out, placed one massive hand on Marcus's shoulder, squeezed gently. Then she pulled something from her pouch, a necklace made of carved wood and stone, intricate beyond anything Marcus had seen, beautiful beyond description. He took it with shaking hands. "I can't. This is too much." But the mother was already backing away, baby secure in her arms. She made one last sound, low, melodic, meant just for Marcus. "Thank you, family, never forgotten." Then she turned and walked into the forest, her baby's arms wrapped tight around her neck, both of them disappearing into the trees like they'd never existed at all. Marcus stood on his porch as the sun rose, the necklace heavy around his neck, the carved bird from before clutched in his hand. The cabin felt empty now, hollowed out. Like purpose, had walked out the door along with a baby Bigfoot and wasn't coming back. He went inside, cleaned up the evidence, burned the bloody bandages, scrubbed the floor, put everything back, Exactly as it had been before, a dying baby appeared and changed everything. Made his cabin look like nothing impossible had happened here. But the necklace around his neck and the ache in his chest said otherwise. 3 days after the baby left, Marcus couldn't sleep. He'd lie in the loft, staring at the ceiling, mind replaying every moment, the mother's desperate eyes, the baby's small hand touching his arm, that last hug before they disappeared into the forest. The cabin felt wrong now, too quiet, like something essential had been extracted and the walls knew it. He tried to get back into his routine, chopping wood, checking the greenhouse, cataloging plant specimens. But his heart wasn't in it. Everything felt hollow, mechanical, like he was just going through motions while the real Marcus was somewhere else entirely. The men came back on day 4, just like they'd promised. Same trucks, same tactical gear, more equipment this time. Ground-penetrating radar, advanced thermal imaging, the kind of tech that cost government-level money. They searched his property for 6 hours, tore through his shed, checked every inch of the cabin, including the root cellar they finally found. Empty, all of it empty. The tall one stood in Marcus's doorway, frustration carved into every line of his face. "Where is it, Dr. Chen? Where's what? Don't play games. The thermal signature, the evidence we collected something was here." Marcus met his eyes, steady and calm. "You're looking for Bigfoot, in Montana, in 2025. You realize how that sounds, right? Maybe your equipment malfunctioned. Maybe you saw a bear, a moose, hell, maybe my wood stove threw off your readings. But there's nothing here except an old professor, trying to live out his retirement in peace. We found hair samples, analyzed them. Unknown primate, possibly Gigantopithecus, adjacent. Then publish your findings," Marcus said. "Submit them for peer review. I'm sure the scientific community would be fascinated." "Oh wait, you can't, because you're not scientists. You're hunters. And whatever you think you're looking for, it's long gone." The man stared at him for a long moment. Then he pulled out a card, dropped it on the table. "When you're ready to talk, call me. The offer stands cooperation, means compensation. Obstruction means prosecution." They left. Marcus burned the card in his wood stove and went back to pretending his life made sense. But the forest remembered. Nature kept receipts. A week after the baby left, Marcus found the first gift. He stepped out for his morning coffee, and there it was sitting on the old stump at the edge of the tree line. A flat stone, and on top of it, a small pile of items arranged with clear intention. Clean moss, 3 perfect pine cones, a cluster of winterberries still on their branch. Not random. Deliberate. An offering. Marcus stood there holding his coffee, staring at this impossible thing, feeling his throat get tight. They were alive, they were safe, and they were saying thank you. He didn't touch the gift, just looked at it for a long time. Then he whispered, "You're welcome, buddy. Stay safe out there." 3 days later, another gift. This time it was different. A small carved figure, maybe 4 inches tall, made from wood and shaped into something that looked like a human. Simple but recognizable. The proportions were slightly off, like it had been carved by someone learning human anatomy from observation rather than study. It was Marcus. They'd carved Marcus. He picked it up with shaking hands, traced the details with his fingers. The figure wore something approximating a coat, held something that might have been a medical bag. They'd captured him in the act of helping, frozen in wood, a moment of compassion made permanent. "Oh, kid," Marcus said to the empty forest. "You're gonna make me cry out here." The gifts kept coming. Every few days, something new would appear on the stump. A woven grass bracelet that fit Marcus's wrist perfectly. A smooth river stone with a hole through it, strung on plant fiber. A bundle of useful herbs Marcus recognized from his ethnobotany studies. Each one a message, a thank you, a reminder that some connections didn't end just because distance separated you. Marcus started leaving gifts too. He'd carve small figures of his own, nowhere near as skilled as theirs, but honest attempts. Animals he'd seen, trees from the property, once a rough approximation of what he thought the baby might look like as an adult. He'd leave them on the stump, along with food he thought they might eat. Dried fruits, nuts, honey in sealed containers. They developed a system. Marcus would leave something, and within a day or two it would be gone, replaced by something new. Silent communication across species, across impossible boundaries, proving that gratitude and friendship didn't require shared language. The men came back twice more over the following weeks, each time with less conviction, more frustration. Whatever trail they'd been following had gone cold. The Bigfoot family had vanished into the deep wilderness, smart enough to avoid detection, protected by terrain that had hidden their people for millennia. Eventually, the men stopped coming. Marcus figured they'd moved on to other leads, other impossible creatures to hunt. Or maybe their funding dried up, or their bosses decided chasing cryptids in Montana winter wasn't cost-effective. Either way, his mountain went quiet again. But Marcus wasn't alone anymore. Not really. February turned into March, snow melting into mud season, revealing the forest floor beneath. Marcus spent his days hiking farther than he had in years, exploring territories he'd previously avoided. He told himself he was collecting plant specimens, observing spring emergence patterns, doing field work. Really, he was looking for signs, tracks, tree breaks, anything that might tell him his family, because that's how he thought of them now, was still out there and thriving. He found evidence everywhere once he knew what to look for. Footprints near the creek, but placed deliberately in rocky areas that wouldn't hold clear impressions. Tree structures that looked natural unless you understood the pattern. Deer remains that had been processed in ways consistent with tool use, bones cracked for marrow, hides removed cleanly, nothing wasted. They were ghosts, moving through their territory with skill that came from generations of avoiding human detection. But they left just enough signs for Marcus to follow, like breadcrumbs meant for someone who cared enough to look. One afternoon in late March, Marcus was hiking maybe 5 miles from his cabin when he found something that stopped him cold. A tree with bark stripped away about chest high and carved into the exposed wood, clear as day, a symbol. 2 figures, one large and one small, holding hands. And beside them, a third figure, roughly human-shaped, standing with them, a family portrait. And he was in it. Marcus stood there in the mud and melting snow, pack heavy on his shoulders, and broke down completely, just sat on a fallen log and sobbed, all the grief and loneliness and fear and love he'd been holding for 4 years, pouring out in gasping breaths that echoed through empty forest. He cried for David, for the life they'd planned and never got to finish. Cried for the baby who'd shown up dying and taught him that purpose could find you in the strangest ways. Cried for the mother who'd trusted him with the most precious thing in her world. Cried for himself, for the man who'd thought he was done caring about anything and discovered he'd been wrong. When he finally pulled himself together, the sun was setting, and he had a long hike back, but he felt lighter, cleaner, like something that had been infected in his soul had finally drained and could start healing. He touched the carving gently. "I miss you too, buddy. Every damn day." Spring came proper in April, the mountains exploding with life. Marcus threw himself into his work, real work this time, not just survival maintenance. He started documenting everything he'd observed about the Bigfoot family. Not for publication, he'd never betray their trust like that, but for himself. To prove it had happened, to process what it meant. He filled notebooks with observations, drew sketches from memory, wrote detailed descriptions of behavior that suggested complex social structure, tool use, possibly even language. Analyzed the gifts they'd left, trying to understand their cultural significance. Compared them to primate behavior he'd studied in grad school, to indigenous art forms from the region, trying to bridge understanding across impossible gaps. It was the most engaged he'd been with science in years. This wasn't teaching from textbooks, or grading papers, or publishing to maintain tenure. This was pure inquiry, driven by wonder and respect, the kind of work that had made him fall in love with biology in the first place. He wrote long entries in his journal, mixing scientific observation with personal reflection. Day 47 since baby's departure. Found fresh tracks near the North Ridge, adult female based on size and depth, moving with purpose rather than foraging. Possibility, checking on me, monitoring my patterns, or simply passing through territory we now share. The question that haunts me, how long have they been here? Centuries? Millennia? Indigenous peoples talked about them. Sasquatch, Semiques, different names but consistent descriptions. What if they were right all along, and we dismissed it as mythology because it didn't fit our models? Science demande reproducibility, empirical evidence. But some truths exist in the spaces between data points. Some knowledge can't be captured in peer-reviewed journals. David understood that. He'd love this mystery, this beautiful, impossible thing that refuses to be categorized. Late April brought something new. Marcus was sitting on his porch at sunset when he heard it calls in the distance, rolling through the valley. Multiple voices, complex patterns, definitely communication. He'd heard them before, but never this close, never this clearly. He sat perfectly still, listening. The calls went back and forth, varying in pitch and duration, carrying information he couldn't decode, but could feel in his bones. Family, talking to family, coordinating, sharing, connecting across the vast wilderness. Then one call came from much closer, maybe half a mile out, higher pitched than the others, younger. And it held a pattern Marcus recognized, rising tone, short burst, repeated 3 times. The baby. That was the baby's call. Marcus stood up slowly, heart hammering. Called back the only way he knew how, cupped his hands around his mouth and hooted, mimicking the pattern as best he could. Felt ridiculous, like a middle-aged professor playing at being an ape, but did it anyway. Silence. Then, the call came back, same pattern, louder, closer. Holy shit. They were talking to him. Marcus called again, putting everything he had into it. Joy, recognition, missing you, thinking of you. Whether the baby could understand emotional content in vocalizations, he had no idea, but it felt right to try. Another call, even closer now, and then movement at the tree line. Marcus's breath caught. The baby stepped into view, except he wasn't really a baby anymore. He'd grown, shot up maybe 6 inches, filled out through the shoulders and chest. Still young, still smaller than an adult, but strong, healthy, thriving. They stood there looking at each other across the clearing, human and Bigfoot, separated by maybe 60 feet, and every law of biology Marcus had ever taught. The baby's fur was clean, well-groomed, his movement confident. The wound Marcus had treated was invisible under all that hair, just a memory now, a scar hidden beneath healthy tissue. "Hey, buddy," Marcus said softly. "Look at you. You grew." The baby made a sound low, rumbling, happy. Then he did something that made Marcus's heart stop. He raised his right hand, palm forward. The gesture Marcus had taught him while he was healing, the universal sign for hello, for peace, for I see you. Marcus raised his own hand, mirroring the gesture. "I see you too." They stayed like that for a long moment, hands raised in mutual acknowledgement. Then the baby lowered his hand, touched his chest, pointed at Marcus. "You, friend, family." "Yeah," Marcus said, voice breaking. "Family." The baby turned and bounded back into the forest with grace that hadn't existed when he was injured, strength that came from being home and safe and loved. But before he disappeared completely, he looked back one more time, made one last sound that Marcus felt more than heard. "Thank you. Remember. Love." Then he was gone, swallowed by trees and shadows, leaving Marcus standing on his porch, crying happy tears for the first time in 4 years. That night, Marcus slept better than he had since David died, had dreams full of forest sounds and impossible creatures and connections that transcended every boundary humans had invented, woke up feeling lighter, purposeful, alive in ways he'd forgotten were possible. The gifts continued through spring and into summer, sometimes practical, useful herbs, smooth stones that were perfect for sharpening tools, sometimes artistic, more carvings, woven items of stunning complexity. Once a necklace strung with what Marcus eventually identified as eagle feathers, which meant someone had either found them naturally or had access to birds of prey in ways that suggested incredible climbing ability. Marcus responded with his own offerings, carved more figures, getting better with practice. Left honey and dried fruits he knew they liked. Once, he left a small mirror wrapped in leather, curious whether they'd react to their own reflections, what that might suggest about self-awareness. The mirror disappeared within a day. A week later, Marcus found a carved figure of a Bigfoot looking into a small reflective surface made from polished stone. They'd understood what the mirror was for, had carved themselves using it, had shown him they possessed self-recognition, self-awareness, theory of mind, abstract thought. Every gift, every interaction, added data points to the most significant anthropological discovery in human history. And Marcus kept it all secret, protected it like the precious thing it was, because some knowledge was too dangerous to share with a world that would cage it for profit. Summer brought longer days, warmer weather, more opportunities to explore. Marcus pushed deeper into the wilderness, following game trails into territories he'd previously considered inaccessible. He told himself he was being careful, staying safe, but really he was hoping to catch another glimpse, another sign, another moment of connection. June 17th changed everything again. Marcus was maybe 8 miles from his cabin, farther than he usually ventured, following a creek upstream into a canyon he'd never explored. The forest here was old growth, trees that had been standing since before Europeans arrived, the kind of wilderness that felt primordial and sacred. He was collecting water samples, still maintaining his cover of legitimate scientific work, when he heard something that made him freeze. Voices. Multiple voices. Not calls like he'd heard before, but something closer to conversation. Complex vocalizations with clear structure, rhythm, meaning, language. They had language. Marcus moved carefully, quietly, following the sound upstream. Every instinct screamed at him to stop, to turn back, to respect boundaries he was probably crossing. But the scientist in him, the teacher who'd spent 30 years studying communication and social behavior, couldn't resist. He found a position behind a fallen log, partially concealed by ferns, with a clear view of the creek bank ahead. What he saw redefined everything. There were 7 of them. The mother and baby he knew, plus 5 others, 2 adult males, 1 more adult female, 2 juveniles slightly older than the baby Marcus had saved. They were sitting in a rough circle near the water, clearly engaged in some kind of group activity. One of the adult males was demonstrating something, breaking open a rock to reveal the sharp edge inside, then using it to process plant material. The others watched closely, occasionally making sounds that seemed like questions or comments. He'd answer, repeat the demonstration, show them alternative techniques. Teaching. They were teaching. The baby Marcus had saved was sitting between his mother and one of the juveniles, watching intently, occasionally trying the technique himself with smaller rocks. When he succeeded in creating a usable edge, the mother made a sound approval, pride, and touched his shoulder gently. Marcus watched for almost an hour, barely breathing, documenting everything with mental notes since he'd stupidly left his journal at camp. He observed tool creation, food processing, what looked like planning for some future activity based on gestures and sounds. Saw affection exchanged through touches and sounds. Saw conflict resolved. One juvenile tried to take the baby's rock. The mother intervened with sounds that were clearly scolding, and the juvenile backed off immediately. Social structure, education, conflict resolution. Everything that defined human culture existed here in a form he was only beginning to understand. Then the baby looked up and saw him. Marcus froze. The baby froze. For one terrible moment, Marcus was sure he'd just destroyed everything, crossed a line that would end their fragile connection. The baby made a sound alert, but not alarm. The mother's head snapped around, eyes locking on Marcus's position. He could see her body tense, ready to protect, ready to fight if necessary. Marcus slowly raised both hands, palms forward. Peace, friend, remember me. The baby stood up, made more sounds, pointing at Marcus, then touching his own side where the wound had been. Explaining, Marcus realized, telling them, "This is the one who helped me." The group went still, all eyes on Marcus now. He stayed frozen, hands raised, heart hammering, acutely aware that he was a single fragile human surrounded by 7 creatures that could tear him apart without effort. The mother stood slowly, walked toward him with deliberate steps, stopping maybe 10 feet away. They stared at each other, woman and man, Bigfoot and human, mothers who'd fought together to save a life. She made a sound. Deep, complex, clearly a question. Marcus tried to answer in their language, made the best approximation he could of their vocalizations. Probably butchered it, but he tried. The mother tilted her head. Then she did something Marcus would never forget. She smiled. Not a human smile, but unmistakable nonetheless. Lips pulling back slightly, eyes crinkling, expression that conveyed warmth and humor. She'd understood. He'd tried to speak their language, probably failed hilariously, and she found it endearing. She turned back to the group, made more sounds. Extended conversation Marcus couldn't follow, but felt the general meaning of. "This is the human who saved our baby. He's here. He's watching. This is okay." One by one, the others acknowledged him sounds, gestures, that same raised hand greeting the baby had learned. Then they went back to their lesson, simply incorporating Marcus into their environment like he was just another part of the forest. Acceptance. They'd accepted him. Marcus sat behind his log for another 2 hours, watching them work and teach and interact. Occasionally, one would glance his way, checking on him, making sure he hadn't moved closer or done anything threatening. The baby kept looking back and grinning, actual grinning, showing teeth in what was clearly happiness rather than aggression. Eventually, they finished their activity, gathered their tools, and prepared to leave. The mother approached Marcus again, stopped at the respectful distance she'd established. She made a series of sounds, pointed at him, pointed at the forest, made a gesture Marcus interpreted as go, not threatening, inviting. "You can walk with us." Marcus shook his head slowly, pointed back the way he'd come. "I should head back, but thank you. Thank you for letting me see this." The mother seemed to understand. She reached into her pouch, pulled out something small, and tossed it to Marcus underhand. He caught it reflexively. It was a carved figure of a tree, maybe 6 inches tall, with incredible detail down to individual leaves and bark texture. But carved into the trunk was something new symbols. Not pictures, but something more abstract. Marks that might have been language, written language, or might have been decorative. Marcus couldn't tell. "This is beautiful," Marcus said, holding it carefully. "Thank you." The mother touched her chest, touched the tree carving in Marcus's hands, pointed at the forest around them. "Message received. We share this place. You're part of it now." Then she made one more sound, the same melodic call she'd made the night she took her baby home. Family. Never forgotten. Love. The group disappeared into the forest, the baby looking back one last time to wave. Actually wave. Hand moving side to side in pure learned human gesture before vanishing into the trees. Marcus sat there until sunset, holding the carved tree, crying quiet tears of wonder and gratitude and connection so profound it hurt. He'd come to these mountains to hide from life, to survive grief, to exist in isolated stasis until time ran out. Instead, he'd found family, found purpose, found evidence that the world was bigger and stranger and more beautiful than any textbook had ever suggested. Found proof that love was the most powerful force in nature, strong enough to cross species, to bridge impossible gaps, to connect beings that had no evolutionary reason to care about each other. David had been right all along. Some things didn't need to be understood. Some things just needed to be felt. Marcus hiked back to his cabin as stars emerged, mindful of everything he'd witnessed, heart full of everything he'd felt. He didn't write any of it down that night. Some moments were too sacred for documentation, too profound for analysis. He just sat on his porch with the carved tree in his hands and whispered "thank you" to the forest, knowing somehow they'd hear it. The summer continued in a rhythm Marcus had never imagined possible. He'd hike into the wilderness 3, sometimes 4 times a week, and more often than not, he'd find signs they'd been there recently. Sometimes he'd catch glimpses, a figure moving between trees, a hand raised in greeting before disappearing. Once he found the whole group at a different creek, and they let him watch for hours as they taught the juveniles how to fish. They were showing him their world, their culture, their way of being, not aggressively, not seeking anything from him, just sharing. Like neighbors getting to know each other over the fence, except the fence was 10,000 years of parallel evolution. Marcus documented everything in his mind, occasionally in his private journals, but never in ways that could be discovered or misused. He took no photos, collected no physical evidence beyond the gifts they gave him. He'd learned his lesson from the men with tranquilizer guns. Some discoveries were too important to share with a world that would destroy what it couldn't control. August brought something unexpected. Marcus was at his usual spot by the creek when the baby teenager now really approached alone. No mother, no group, just him. He settled down next to Marcus with the easy confidence of someone who'd grown up knowing he was safe here. They sat together in companionable silence for a while, watching water flow over rocks, listening to birds sing. Then the teenager pulled out a flat stone and something that looked like charcoal made from burned wood. He started drawing on the stone. Simple pictures at first. Trees, animals, the Sunday, then something more complex. He drew 2 figures, one furry and one not, sitting side by side exactly like they were right now. Then he offered the charcoal to Marcus. Marcus took it with shaking hands. Drew his own addition to the picture, a heart between the 2 figures. Clumsy, simplistic, but clear in meaning. The teenager looked at it for a long moment. Then he made a sound Marcus had learned meant happiness, approval. Carefully took the stone and put it in a small pouch he'd started carrying. Learned behavior, probably taught by his mother. They sat together until the sun started setting, communicating more in silence than words ever could. When the teenager finally stood to leave, he touched Marcus's shoulder gently, the first time he'd initiated physical contact since he'd been hurt. Then he bounded off into the forest, young and strong and alive, leaving Marcus sitting by the creek thinking about connection and teaching and how love worked in ways that transcended every boundary evolution had created. September brought the first hints of fall, leaves starting to turn, air getting crisp. Marcus knew winter would come soon, would make the mountains less accessible, would push the Bigfoot family deeper into their territory where they'd be safer from weather and humans. He started thinking about legacy, about what happened when he died, because he was 54 now, in decent shape, but getting older, and these mountains were unforgiving. What happened to all this knowledge, all these connections, if he keeled over from a heart attack on some remote trail he couldn't publish? That would bring researchers, hunters, government agencies, everyone who'd see the Bigfoot family as specimens rather than people. But he also couldn't let this knowledge die with him, so he started writing. Not for publication, for preservation. Detailed accounts of every interaction, every observation, every gift exchanged. He wrote about the mother's trust, the baby's recovery, the group's teaching methods, the teenager's drawings. Wrote about what they'd taught him about intelligence and communication and love. He wrote letters too, to David, mostly, even though David was 4 years gone. Told him everything, knowing somehow that David would understand, would appreciate the miracle and mystery and profound beauty of it all. Dear David, he wrote one night by lantern light, I met a family today, not human, but people nonetheless. They've taught me more about what it means to be alive than 30 years in academia ever did. They've shown me that grief doesn't end, but it can transform into something else. Gratitude for having loved. Openness to loving again in unexpected ways. I miss you every single day. But I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm living, really living. I think you'd be proud of that. I think you'd love them. I think you'd understand why I'm writing this instead of shouting it from the rooftops. Some magic can only exist in silence. He sealed the letters in waterproof containers, hid them in places only someone who knew where to look would find them. Insurance, maybe. Or just processing. Grief and wonder tangled together in ways he was still learning to navigate. October came, and with it the first real snow. Marcus knew the visits would become less frequent now. Knew the family would be focused on survival through winter rather than socializing with the strange human. He made peace with it, grateful for what he'd been given. His last visit of the season came in late October. He hiked out to the canyon one final time before winter made it inaccessible. Left gifts on the usual spot, his best carvings, dried foods, a book he'd been reading about primatology that he thought they might like even if they couldn't read it, for the pictures, if nothing else. He didn't expect to see them. But as he was leaving, he heard the call. Multiple voices, the whole family, singing something that sounded like music. Marcus stopped, turned around. They were there, all of them, standing at the edge of the forest. The mother, the teenager, who'd been a dying baby, the others he'd watched all summer. They were singing to him, there was no other word for it. A song of gratitude, of friendship, of see you in spring. Marcus raised his hand in greeting and goodbye. They raised theirs in response. Then they melted into the forest one last time as snow began to fall harder, leaving Marcus standing in the growing white, with tears freezing on his cheeks and his heart fuller than it had been since David died. Winter hit hard that year. Temperatures dropping lower than Marcus had ever seen, snow piling up higher, wind howling through the valley like something alive and angry. He spent long dark months alone in his cabin, keeping the fire burning, rationing supplies, reading the same books over and over. But he wasn't lonely. Not really. Because now he knew what was out there in the wilderness. Knew a family was surviving the winter in their own way, using knowledge passed down through generations, taking care of each other the way families do. Sometimes, late at night when the wind died down, he'd hear them, distant calls echoing through the mountains, family talking to family across vast distances. And sometimes, he'd call back in his clumsy approximation of their language, and they'd answer. Connection maintained even through the harshest season. Proof that what they'd built together was real and lasting, and strong enough to survive separation. Marcus turned 55 that winter, alone in his cabin, celebrating with extra honey in his tea and a small fire in David's honor. He thought about everything that had changed in the year since a dying baby showed up at his door. He'd started that year as a ghost, a man going through motions while waiting for time to run out. He'd end it as something different, a bridge between worlds, a keeper of impossible secrets, someone who'd learned that family came in forms textbooks never mentioned. The winter finally broke in late March, snow melting into rushing streams, revealing a forest floor that looked reborn. Marcus emerged from his cabin like a bear from hibernation, restless and eager, needing to know if his family had made it through the harsh season. He hiked out to the canyon on the first day. The trail was passable, legs shaky from months of limited activity, pack heavy with gifts he'd spent all winter making. Carved figures of every family member, a necklace he'd woven from plant fibers, using techniques he'd found in anthropology books, dried foods he'd carefully preserved. The meeting spot was empty. Marcus left his gifts and tried not to worry. They were wild creatures, no, wild people living on their own terms. Just because he was ready for spring didn't mean they'd be waiting at his convenience. He came back 3 days later. The gifts were gone, replaced by a single item that made his breath catch. A carving of Marcus, but different from the others. This one showed him older, grayer, sitting on what was clearly his porch with a book in his lap. And surrounding him, barely visible in the carved shadows, were multiple figures. Bigfoot figures, watching over him, protecting him. The message was clear. We see you aging. We know you're mortal. We're here. Marcus sat down hard on a rock, holding the carving with shaking hands. They understood human lifespans, understood he wouldn't be here forever, and they were telling him it mattered. His life mattered to them. "I'm not going anywhere yet," he said to the empty forest. "Got too much to stick around for now." The visits resumed in April, careful at first, like everyone was testing whether the connection had survived winter. Marcus would hike out and find fresh signs, tracks, gifts, once an entire meal of foraged foods arranged on a flat rock, like they were inviting him to dinner. He'd leave his own signs in return. Started teaching himself to identify the plants they ate, the routes they traveled, the way they marked their territory. Became fluent in a language of symbols and gestures that bridged the gap between his world and theirs. May brought the first face-to-face meeting of the season. Marcus was at the creek when the teenager appeared, except he wasn't really a teenager anymore. He'd grown again over winter, shot up to maybe 7 feet, filled out through the chest and shoulders. Almost adult-sized, though still moving with young energy. "Holy shit, look at you," Marcus said, grinning. "You're huge." The young Bigfoot made a sound that Marcus had learned was laughter short, huffing exhalations that shook his whole body. Then he settled down next to Marcus like they'd just seen each other yesterday instead of 5 months ago. They fell into their old rhythm sitting together, Marcus talking about his winter, the Bigfoot making sounds. Marcus was slowly learning to interpret. Sometimes the Bigfoot would draw pictures in the dirt, showing Marcus things that had happened: a hunt, a cave they'd sheltered in, what looked like some kind of ceremony or celebration. "You had a party?" Marcus asked, pointing at the drawing of multiple figures in a circle. "What were you celebrating?" The young Bigfoot touched his own chest, made a complex sound, gestured in a way that Marcus eventually understood. Coming of age. He'd gone through some kind of ritual that marked his transition to adulthood. "I'm sorry I missed it," Marcus said quietly. "Would have brought a gift if I'd known." The young Bigfoot young man, really, Marcus corrected himself, made a dismissive gesture, then drew something else. 2 figures, one human and one Bigfoot, standing side by side with hands clasped. "You were there in spirit. You're always with us." Marcus had to look away, blinking hard against sudden tears. Yeah, you're always with me too." June brought something unprecedented. Marcus was at his cabin, working in his greenhouse, when he heard a sound that made him freeze. A call, close by, from the tree line just beyond his property. The mother. She'd never come this close to his cabin before, had always maintained distance like she was respecting boundaries. Marcus stepped outside slowly. She was standing at the edge of the clearing, and she wasn't alone. The young man was with her, and behind them, partially hidden, were 2 of the juveniles Marcus had seen before. The mother made a sound complex, clearly asking permission. "You want to come closer?" Marcus said, heart hammering. "That's... yes. Yes, of course." She took a few steps forward, the others following her lead. They spread out slightly, examining Marcus's property with clear curiosity. One of the juveniles crept toward the greenhouse, peered inside at the plants growing there. The other one investigated the woodpile, running hands over the stacked logs, like analyzing how it was constructed. The young man walked straight to Marcus, no hesitation, and held out something. It was a basket woven from plant fibers, with a skill that would have made any craftsperson jealous, filled with things Marcus recognized. Medicinal herbs, some of the same ones the mother had brought when her baby was dying. "For me?" Marcus asked, taking it carefully. The mother made a sound, gestured in a way Marcus understood. She was teaching him, showing him their plant knowledge, trusting him with information that had probably been kept secret from humans for thousands of years. They spent an hour at his cabin, examining his space, leaving gifts, building trust. The juveniles were fascinated by everything: the solar panels, the greenhouse, the hand tools Marcus used for carpentry. They'd touch things carefully, look to the mother for permission before picking anything up. Marcus brought out some of his reference books, ones with pictures of local plants and animals, showed them to the juveniles, who made excited sounds when they recognized species they knew. One of them pointed at a picture of an elk, then made a gesture Marcus eventually understood. "I've hunted these." Knowledge exchange. They were teaching him and letting him teach them, building a shared understanding that transcended language barriers. When they finally left, the mother approached Marcus one last time. She placed both hands on his shoulders, gentle despite her strength, and made a sound that resonated in Marcus's chest. Then she touched her forehead to his, just for a moment, a gesture of profound respect and affection. "Thank you," Marcus whispered, "for trusting me, for letting me be part of this." She pulled back, made one more sound, the one Marcus knew meant family, and led her people back into the forest. Marcus stood in his clearing for a long time after they left, hands still holding the basket of herbs, forehead still tingling from her touch. He'd been accepted not just as a curious observer or a helpful stranger, but as part of their community, part of their family. That night, he wrote in his journal with shaking hands, "I came to these mountains to die not actively, but passively, to fade away from a world that had taken everything I loved. Instead, I found a reason to live that I never imagined possible. They've given me more than I gave them, infinitely more. They've given me purpose, connection, belonging. They've taught me that family isn't defined by species or blood, but by who shows up, who cares, who stays." Summer became a season of learning. The family visited Marcus's cabin regularly now, sometimes the whole group, sometimes just a few members. They taught him their plant knowledge, which roots were medicinal, which berries were safe, how to identify water sources, showed him how to move through the forest with less noise, how to read weather patterns from cloud formations, how to find caves and shelter spots he'd never noticed. Marcus taught them, in return showed them his books, his tools, tried to explain concepts like maps and writing. They absorbed everything with that intense curiosity that marked true intelligence. The young man especially loved the books, would sit for hours looking at pictures, occasionally asking Marcus questions through gestures and sounds. One afternoon in July, the young man brought his own book, not paper bark, stripped carefully and pressed flat, with drawings and symbols burned into the surface. He showed it to Marcus reverently, like sharing something sacred. It was a history. Their history. Images depicting generations of their people hunting, gathering, raising children, mourning their dead. Territorial maps showing ranges that stretched across the entire mountain region. Pictures of encounters with humans dating back centuries, some peaceful, many violent, all remembered. And there, near the end, recent additions. A figure that was clearly Marcus, tending to a small wounded figure. The mother watching from shadows. The whole family greeting the human who'd saved one of their own. Marcus was in their history now, part of their collective memory. His actions had been deemed significant enough to record for future generations. I don't have words for what this means," Marcus said, voice breaking. The young man made a sound understanding, acceptance, pointed at Marcus, pointed at the history bark, touched his chest. "You're one of us now, forever." They sat together as the sun set, Marcus examining every image on the bark history, the young man explaining through gesture and sound what each one meant. It was the most profound anthropology lesson Marcus had ever received, and it would never be published, never be shared, never make it into any academic journal. It was just for him, just for this moment, just for the connection between two beings who should have been impossible but were real anyway. August brought the first signs that something was changing in Marcus. He noticed it slowly getting winded more easily on hikes, occasional chest tightness that he chalked up to age and altitude, moments where his heart would skip beats in ways that felt wrong. He didn't want to acknowledge it, didn't want to face what it might mean. He was only 55, relatively healthy, not ready to admit his body might be failing him. But the Forrest family noticed. They always noticed. The mother started bringing him specific herbs, plants Marcus recognized from his medical training as cardiac supportive. She'd gesture at his chest, make concerned sounds, insist he take what she offered. "I'm fine," Marcus protested. "Just getting older." She made a sound that clearly meant, "Bullshit, you're not fine." Pushed the herbs into his hands with more force than usual. The young man started staying closer during their hikes, adjusting his pace to match Marcus's slower one, checking on him more frequently. The others would bring easily digestible foods, nutrient-dense items that suggested they knew he needed to maintain his strength. They were taking care of him now, the way he'd once taken care of the dying baby. The circle completing itself. By September, Marcus couldn't ignore it anymore. The chest pain was getting worse, more frequent. He'd wake up at night with his heart racing, struggling to catch his breath. He knew what this was. He'd seen the same symptoms in David before the heart attack that killed him. He needed to see a doctor, get on medication, maybe have surgery. But that meant leaving the mountain, going back to civilization, potentially being gone for weeks or months. It meant leaving his family. He tried to explain it to them at their next meeting, pointed at his chest, made gestures about needing human medicine, drew pictures in the dirt of hospitals and doctors, tried to communicate that he'd come back, that this wasn't goodbye. The mother watched him, eyes full of understanding and sorrow. When he finished, she made a long series of sounds clearly communicating something complex to her family. Then she turned back to Marcus and did something she'd never done before. She took his hand and placed it over her heart. Let him feel it beating slower than human, steadier, powerful. Then she took her own hand and placed it over his heart, feeling the irregular rhythm, the weakness. Message received. "I understand. You're sick. You need help." The young man stepped forward, wrapped Marcus in a hug that was gentle despite his size, held him like something precious that might break, made sounds Marcus recognized as their word for family, repeated over and over. The whole family gathered around him, touching him gently shoulders, arms, head in what was clearly a blessing or a prayer or a goodbye that hoped not to be permanent. "I'll come back," Marcus promised, tears streaming down his face. "I swear to God, if I survive this, I'll come back." The mother made one last sound, pointed at Marcus, pointed at the mountains, touched her chest. "This is your home. We'll be waiting." Marcus left for Missoula 2 days later, packing only essentials, leaving everything else in the cabin. He'd carved a figure before he left, all of them together, human and Bigfoot, standing in a circle, and placed it on the meeting stone with a note he knew they couldn't read, but hoped they'd understand the meaning of, "Family forever. I'll return." The drive down the mountain was the hardest thing he'd done since David's funeral. Every mile felt like betrayal, like abandoning the most important thing in his life. But his heart was failing, and dying alone in the woods would mean never seeing them again. The hospital confirmed what he'd feared: severe coronary artery disease, multiple blockages, heart functioning at maybe 60%. They wanted to do bypass surgery, said without it he had maybe 6 months, maybe less. "When can I go home after surgery?" Marcus asked. 6 to 8 weeks recovery minimum. Then, "Do it. Schedule it now. Soonest possible." He called no one, listed no emergency contacts, faced the surgery alone because he'd burned most bridges when he moved to the mountains, and the only family he cared about couldn't exactly visit a hospital. Went under anesthesia thinking about the mother's hands over his heart, the young man's hug, the promise he'd made to return. The surgery went well. Marcus woke up with new arteries, new plumbing, his heart beating stronger than it had in years. The pain was incredible, recovery brutal, but he pushed through it with singular focus. "I have to get back. They're waiting." He spent 6 weeks in Missoula doing physical therapy, building strength, lying to doctors about having a support system at home. Spent his evenings carving small figures from wood the hospital staff brought him, building his strength and maintaining his connection to the family even across the distance. Late October, against medical advice and with prescriptions he'd probably never properly take, Marcus drove back up the mountain. The colors were peak fall, everything burning gold and red, the world showing off before winter hit. His cabin was exactly as he'd left it, but the meeting stone was covered in gifts. Dozens of them. Carvings, woven items, food, herbs, everything they could think to leave. Proof they'd been checking constantly, waiting for his return, leaving offerings like prayers for his survival. Marcus broke down right there, sitting on the ground, surrounded by proof of love that crossed every boundary. They'd been taking care of him even in his absence, maintaining connection, refusing to forget. He left a gift of his own, a carving of a heart with a crack through it, then symbols representing stitching or repair. I was broken. I'm healing. I'm here. The next morning, he hiked out to the canyon, moving slower than before but determined. His heart was strong now, beating steady thanks to human medicine and the will to return to family. They were waiting for him, all of them, like they'd known somehow that today was the day. The mother saw him first, made a sound that started low and built into something between a cry and a song, joy and relief, and love so vast it echoed off the canyon walls. She ran to him, actually ran, something Marcus had never seen her do, and dropped to her knees in front of him, touching his face, his chest over his heart, checking that he was real and alive and whole. The young man was right behind her, pulling Marcus into a hug that would have cracked ribs before surgery but was gentle now, measured, careful of his healing body. The others surrounded them, making sounds of celebration, touching Marcus to confirm he was solid and present and returned. Marcus sobbed into the young man's shoulder, letting out 6 weeks of fear and loneliness and desperate need to be home. I came back, he said over and over. I promised I'd come back. The mother took his hand, placed it over his chest, feeling the strong, regular heartbeat. Then she placed her hand over his heart, feeling it herself, made a sound of profound approval and relief. Fixed, you're staying. They spent the day together, celebrating his return in ways that needed no words, shared food, exchanged gifts, sat in companionable silence while the forest moved around them. The young man showed Marcus new drawings, all the ones he'd made over the 6 weeks, chronicling the family's activities, marking time until Marcus came home. When the sun started to set, and Marcus knew he needed to get back before dark, the mother stopped him. She pulled something from her pouch, a necklace she'd clearly spent enormous time creating. Carved wooden pieces interspersed with stones, and what looked like small bones, strung on braided plant fiber. Beautiful and intricate beyond description. She placed it around Marcus's neck, settled it against his chest, right over his healing heart. Made a series of sounds Marcus understood. Protection, love, welcome home. Thank you, Marcus whispered. For everything, for not giving up on me. She touched his face gently with one massive hand, made the sound that meant family, made another sound new, one Marcus hadn't heard before, but its meaning was crystal clear in context. Always. Marcus hiked back to his cabin as darkness fell, the necklace warm against his chest, his heart beating strong and steady, his purpose renewed. He'd been given a second chance at life, and he knew exactly what he was doing with it. Staying here, staying with them, learning and teaching, and building bridges between worlds until his repaired heart finally gave out for good. November brought early snow, but Marcus was better prepared this year. He'd stocked supplies, winterized the cabin properly, made peace with the isolation, because he knew now it wasn't really isolation at all. The family visited when they could, less frequently as winter deepened, but always leaving signs, tracks in the snow near his cabin that said, "We're checking on you." Gifts left where he'd find them that said, "We remember you're here." Marcus carved more figures, wrote more journal entries, documented everything in case, someday, somehow, the right person found these records and understood their significance. Not to exploit or expose, but to know, to understand that they'd been wrong about what was possible. He wrote letters to David too, continuing the one-sided conversation. "I had heart surgery, love. Same thing that killed you, almost killed me. But I made it through because I had something you didn't a reason to survive that was waiting for me on the other side. I'm sorry you didn't have that. I'm sorry I couldn't be that for you. But I think you'd understand why I came back here. Why I chose this over comfort and convenience and safety? Because this is real. This is what matters. Connection that transcends everything we thought we knew about the world. I love you. I miss you. And I'm living the kind of life you always said I should live, full of wonder and purpose and love in unexpected forms. I hope wherever you are, you can see this. I hope you're proud. December brought the solstice, the longest night, and Marcus celebrated alone in his cabin with extra fire and thoughts of his family out in the wilderness. Wondered if they marked the solstice too, if they had ceremonies or rituals for the turning of the year. The answer came 2 days after solstice. Marcus woke before dawn to sounds outside his cabin, not threatening, but definitely present. Multiple somethings moving around his property. He grabbed a flashlight, stepped out onto his porch, and stopped dead. They were here, all of them, the whole extended family, more than he'd ever seen together before. Maybe 20 or 25 individuals, ranging from infants clinging to their mothers to elders with grey-white fur. They'd come down from their high territory, traveled through deep snow, to be here. The mother stepped forward from the group, made a sound that Marcus understood as greeting, as invitation. They were inviting him to something. Marcus grabbed his heavy coat, his boots, everything he needed for cold, followed them into the forest, trusting completely, his repaired heart beating strong and steady. They led him to a place he'd never been before, a cave system hidden in the canyon walls, large enough for the whole group with room to spare. Inside, the cave was warm from carefully maintained fires, lit by what looked like oil lamps made from hollowed stones. This was their home, their actual dwelling place, and they were showing it to him. The group settled in a large circle, and the mother guided Marcus to a place between her and the young man. Position of honor, protected and welcomed. Then they began to sing. All of them, voices blending in harmonies that shouldn't have been possible, but were beautiful beyond description. The song rose and fell, complex and purposeful, clearly telling a story through sound. An elder stepped forward, the same silver-backed male Marcus had seen briefly before, but older than he'd realized, moving with careful dignity. He approached Marcus and placed something in his hands. A staff, carved from a single piece of wood, covered in symbols and images that chronicled everything Marcus had experienced with them. The dying baby, the mother's trust, the healing, the learning, the connection. All of it preserved in wood, a history given physical form. The elder made sounds long, complex, clearly speaking directly to Marcus. The young man leaned close, tried to translate through gesture and the language they'd built together. You saved one of us. You kept our secret. You treated us as people, not animals. You are family now, officially and forever. This staff proves it. It gives you status among our people, elder, teacher, honorary member of our tribe. Marcus held the staff with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face. They were making him part of their social structure, giving him a role in their society, telling him officially what he'd felt all along. He was one of them now. The ceremony continued with gift-giving, every family member bringing something to add to a pile in front of Marcus. Food, tools, art, medicines, offerings that said you belong here. We provide for you. You're under our protection. When it was Marcus's turn, he gave them what he'd brought. Not much, just a few carved figures and some dried foods. But he also gave them something else. He stood, staff in hand, and sang. He'd never sung in his life. David had been the musical one. But he tried anyway, singing old folk songs David had taught him, his voice rough and off-key but honest. Singing not because he was good at it, but because they'd sung for him and he needed to return the honor. The family listened in what felt like respectful silence. When he finished, they made sounds of approval, of acceptance, of understanding that he'd tried to speak their language of music, even if he'd butchered it. The mother stood then, approached Marcus, and did something that made his breath catch. She took off a necklace she was wearing, one she'd clearly had for years, worn and cherished, and placed it around his neck alongside the one she'd given him before. Hers, her personal necklace, given to him, the highest honor she could offer. Marcus took off his own wedding ring, the one he'd worn for 4 years after David died, unable to let go. Held it out to her with shaking hands. She understood immediately, took it carefully, examined it, and placed it on her own finger too small for her, but she wore it anyway. A token from him, equally meaningful, equally significant. They stood there, human and Bigfoot, wearing each other's most precious possessions, and Marcus felt something shift. Not loss, but transformation. He'd been holding on to David through that ring, holding on to grief, holding on to the past. Now he was letting go, honoring what was by giving it to someone else who understood its weight, moving forward while still remembering. The ceremony continued late into the night. More songs, more stories told through sounds Marcus couldn't fully understand but felt in his bones. More connection built through shared presence and attention. When it finally ended, and the family prepared to let Marcus return home, the young man pulled him aside, made a gesture Marcus had seen before, 2 fingers pointed at eyes, then pointing at Marcus. "I see you." Marcus repeated it back, adding his own gesture hand over heart, then reaching out to touch the young man's chest. "I love you." The young man wrapped him in one more hug, made a sound that was part laugh and part sob, then released him. Marcus hiked back to his cabin through snow and darkness, staff in hand, 2 necklaces around his neck, wedding ring given away to honor the past while embracing the present. His heart beat strong and steady, his purpose crystalline clear. He was home, really, truly home, not just in a place, but in a family, in a community, in a life that mattered. The impossible had become his everyday reality, and there was nowhere else he'd rather be. So what's the lesson here, right? Real talk, this whole story's fiction. But the questions it raises? Those are real as it gets. If something impossible showed up at your door, wounded and desperate, what would you choose? The safe answer or the right one? Fear or compassion? Protecting yourself or protecting something that needed you? Marcus could have called those men, could have handed over the baby, collected whatever reward they offered, gone back to his isolated existence. Instead, he chose connection. He chose to see intelligence in a form he'd been trained to dismiss. He chose to become family with beings that science said didn't exist. And in doing that, he found what he'd thought he'd lost forever: purpose, love, belonging. He found that grief doesn't end, but it can transform. That loneliness isn't fixed by being around people, but by being around those who truly see you. That family is built through actions, through showing up, through choosing to care even when it's hard or scary or impossible. The Bigfoot family never forgot Marcus. For the rest of his life, which ended peacefully 15 years later, on his porch at sunrise, staff in hand, surrounded by gifts they'd left the night before, like they'd known it was time, they kept the connection alive. They taught their children about the human who'd saved one of them, who'd become part of their tribe, who'd proven that compassion could cross any boundary. Carved his image into their history bark, so future generations would know his name or their version of it. The sound they made that meant heart healer, bridge walker, friend of the forest people. When hikers occasionally report seeing groups of Bigfoot in the Bitterroots, sometimes they mention something strange. 1 or 2 of them wearing small pieces of human clothing or carrying objects that look manufactured. Gifts from Marcus, passed down through generations, worn as proof that once, long ago, the impossible happened. A human and Bigfoot became family, and in doing so, they proved that love is the most powerful force in nature, stronger than instinct, stronger than fear, stronger than every boundary evolution or society or science has ever drawn. This whole thing's fiction. But ask yourself, would you open that door? Would you choose helping over hiding? Would you risk everything for a baby that shouldn't exist but was dying anyway? Would you let yourself love again after losing everything? Marcus did. And it gave him 15 more years of life that mattered, of mornings watching the forest with family hidden in the trees, of nights knowing he was protected and cherished and part of something bigger than himself. The message about choosing kindness when fear's knocking. That's the realest thing I can tell you. The world's full of impossible things waiting to be acknowledged, to be helped, to be loved. Most people walk past them, too scared or busy or convinced they know what's possible. Marcus stopped. He looked. He chose compassion. And it transformed everything. Would you do the same? Drop your thoughts below. Peace, fam. Choose kindness. Choose connection. Choose love even when it looks impossible. Because sometimes the impossible is just waiting for someone brave enough to believe.